Hi there, Rockstar, and welcome to Stand Out, Get Noticed. I'm Christina Canters, founder of The C Method, where I'm all about helping people to build powerful communication skills. You can learn more at thecmethod.com. Today's podcast is all about taking initiative, and I'm very excited to welcome back to the podcast Joshua Spodek. Now, Joshua is a very accomplished human being. He's taught, he's practiced and coached leadership and entrepreneurship at Columbia, NYU, and private corporations for nearly 2 decades. He's the author of the best-selling book Leadership Step by Step, and he's recently published a new book called Initiative, A Proven Method to Bring Your Passions to Life. He also hosts the award-winning Leadership and the Environment podcast. He writes a column at Inc., and his projects have been featured in all sorts of publications like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. Oh, did I also mention that he holds 5 Ivy League degrees, including a PhD in astrophysics? And other things is he does burpees every day. So far, he's at 130,000 and counting. And he walks his talk when it comes to doing things for the environment, such as, he picks up at least 1 piece of litter a day. He doesn't fly anymore, and he doesn't buy food wrapped in packaging. So he's all about demonstrating, what he's teaching. And I highly recommend that you check out his podcast, Leadership and the Environment. It's an awesome listen, and he shares many nuggets of wisdom as well on that show. So I was really excited to get Joshua on the show. Oh, by the way, he also joined us in episode 96, where we talked about leadership and being authentic. So if you enjoy this podcast, definitely go back and have a listen to that one. Now, today, I'm going to share with you this conversation that we had around initiative. And Joshua and I talk about why people often struggle to find their passion, what holds people back from starting projects, and the steps required for bringing a successful passion project or business idea to life. So if you want to start a project but you don't have any ideas, or maybe you want to start taking initiative at work and present some ideas, to upper management and get those realized. Or maybe you have so many ideas that you just don't know which one to pick and you're stalling and not doing anything about them, then I highly recommend that you listen to this episode. The skills that Joshua talks about they're all incredibly valuable, and you can use them whether you're a budding entrepreneur or looking to advance your career. Show notes for this episode will be at thecmethod.com/216. Okay, let's move on to this conversation with Joshua Spodek.
There's a lot of people out there who say, I want to start a business, I want to start a company, I want to start a project. Actually, and it doesn't even have to be, once you start picking up on it, there's a lot of people who want to have more control over what they do in their job. They don't necessarily want to file with the state to get an LLC or to get benefits packages for their employees. And when I ask them, people who have not started something but want to start something, why they haven't started something, the number one answer by far is, I don't have an idea. If I talk to people who are running something, whether it's a division in a company that they started, if it's a hobby, a podcast, if it's, something, but it could be a startup. If I ask them, is what you're doing now the idea that you started with? Never. I've not heard someone say it's exactly what I started with. And it's always something changed. And so if you talk to entrepreneurship people, they'll say, yeah, we got to iterate and pivot. But it's not always the case, because a lot of people don't have ideas. But that doesn't mean that they can't love something that they do and serve an audience so well that audience rewards them back. And that contradiction, that the same thing that successful people they use it to get started. They're like, well, I got to get started with something and then I can iterate and change. It's exactly what holds back the people who don't start, which tells me it's not the idea. If the idea can work for some and not for others, it's the people, it's the skills. And I believe that it's the social emotional skills and that make the difference. And if you want to develop social emotional skills, you can read all you want. You can watch all the videos. You can take all the courses if they're lecture based or if they're case study based. They don't teach social emotional skills. You got to do it through practice. And it's in other fields where you have to learn to perform social emotional skills, acting, the military, sports, playing a musical instrument. Everybody knows you start with the basics. And I looked around, practicing. In piano, it's playing scales. It's in tennis, it's hitting ground strokes. In basketball, it's dribbling. In the military, they call military basic training because it's training basic stuff. And there's no basic training. There's no scales for how to start a project that could be entrepreneurial, but just starting something where you're going to organize people, you're going to satisfy need. Ideally, that is something that you love. And that's what I wanted to create.
Can I pause you there for a moment?
Yeah.
So when we talk about starting something, starting a project, let's say we take someone who's working, they're working in a corporation, maybe they're a leader at work, they've got a team, they've got a family at home, they're super busy, they've got so many things going on. Why would they consider, starting a project? Like why is that something that would benefit them?
It's to have control over what they want to do. I mean, what the big thing driving me is that I was getting a PhD in physics. This is in the 90s. And pardon me, it's an Ivy League degree. And it's my fourth Ivy League degree at that. And so I'm at the pinnacle of Western education. And now I realized I didn't want to keep doing research. So I didn't want to continue with science. I love science. I always will. But I felt trapped. I felt like, what can I do with a physics PhD? And the things that were available to keep doing what I didn't want to do. I could go to Wall Street, didn't want to do that. I could go into military industrial complex stuff. I didn't want to do that. And, I tell a story about, now I've turned this into a talk where I say to an audience, you guys are well educated. You know of other people who started projects, and they could, Bill Gates, Michael Dell, people like that. And they can go and do, I ask the audience, you know about them. Of course they do. They could do whatever they wanted. They happen to pick what they did, but they could have done anything. And they always say yes. And I say, but you, like I, feel trapped. And I can do this with graduate students. I can do this with McKinsey. I can do this with, wherever I do it. They're always like, yes. And I say, you feel you have fewer options, but you have more education. Isn't that the opposite of what education is for? And so driving me is that starting my first company was my exit from feeling trapped. And it created all sorts of options. Now, I happened to start a company my first time. But I've learned that these skills can be applied to many different things. So now that I began my book with the story of Raphael, because Raphael came to me and he felt trapped. He felt, I keep telling my managers, I want to do these projects, and these projects are great. They're clearly profitable for the company. They're beneficial. And the managers would always say, well, let's think about it. And then usually they wouldn't even respond. But when they did, they'd say, well, we have to shelf this. And so he came to me and he said, I didn't know this until he told me. But what he started with was, I have to leave this company. I can't work for anyone again. I have to do my own thing. And you've started companies, so I'm hiring you as a coach to help me through this. And I started by working with him, doing exercises to get him to start a company. But actually, he didn't tell me he was doing this. He was using what I was teaching him to re-propose projects in a more effective way. Instead of saying, take it or leave it, as he was doing, he would say, early on, before it was really formed, he would say to his manager, here's this thing I'm working on. I wonder if you could give me some advice, which is what the exercises do, is to get advice and draw people into the project. And when they give you advice, they feel they've contributed to the project, and they feel they want you to succeed, because if you succeed based on, in part, their advice, they feel like they're part of that.
I think it's really interesting and important to point out that someone like Raphael, who you're talking about, he was able to use initiative, what you taught him, to implement and create projects within his company.
Yeah.
And that way he felt more like he had more options. He felt like he could contribute more.
Yeah. And also he created relationships with the decision makers so that they were part of it. They were supporting him for their own personal reasons. And one day he came to me and he said, Josh, I don't need to start another company. I was like, I thought that's what you hired me. He goes, I got the project that I wanted to work on. And then he explained to me how he was doing all this stuff. And that's when I realized the skills of initiative, the social and emotional skills, can apply to entrepreneurship. But that's a small subset. This is a superset, and which I think is more broad and more general.
So can you tell me, Josh, what is your definition of initiative?
Well, it's to start something. I mean, what the goal of the book is to enable people to start a project that will reveal, either based on a passion that they know already, and by passion I mean a strong emotion, a strong motivation that they already know, or it will draw it out and to create a project that solves another group's problem so well that they reward you back to make it self-sustaining. So entrepreneurship fits within that, but it's not the only thing that fits within that.
Okay. So you talk about how, I mean, you're very much about, practical step-by-step exercises, and you're all about teaching these emotional and social skills for people to get these projects off the ground. So can you share with us, what is the first step? What is the first step to developing the skills that allow us to start taking initiative?
So step one, the first exercise that I give in the book is to write a personal essay. And that's not really a new thing. A lot of people have written personal essays before. It gets you moving in a direction. I give a couple specific things. There's a couple lists of people to put in there, people in the field that you want to go into, because I want to make sure people get that this is about people and this is about your relationships with other people as well as with yourself. The first thing that's really specific to taking initiative is to write down 5 problems that you see. In the essay, you've picked a field that you want to go into, and it's not restrictive in that if you think about maybe going this and maybe going that, maybe going another, you'll pick one to work with first, but that doesn't mean that that's the one you're going to end up in. But I want to give someone direction, and then to look at that field and think of 5 problems in that field, and they can be simple problems, they can be complex problems. The scale of the problem, not that important, surprisingly, and that's one of the big skills, is to realize that it doesn't take much to have. It's not the idea; it's a seed that you can then use as what you work the next exercises through. So the next exercises, if you don't mind me jumping into what comes next, is...
Well, can I share maybe an example of what this problem could be that you're passionate about? So like, for example, I hate seeing people use those disposable coffee cups every single day. And that's a problem that I see every day. Would that be an example of a problem that you're passionate about to write about in step 1?
Yes, you don't have to be passionate about it now. The field is something you should be generally into. What will happen is the first couple things something that stops a lot of people is they feel like this idea, if it's not worth it, if it's not big enough, people laugh at them or they'll say you should work on something else. And it takes a while for people to get, and this is something that comes out of these exercises, is that what people love to do is often, we've been hurt so many times, we've been laughed at and judged and so forth, that we push it down inside, we cover it up. Not because we want to, just because it's easier not to share stuff and just talk about the weather and sport. That's why we talk about weather and sports, is to avoid these people saying, oh, that, we get judged. And so we keep stuff inside. And so
have you experienced that before?
Yeah, the example I usually give, once when I was in high school, my sister came back from Japan and she bought me this shirt. And I don't know, in Japan it might have looked cool, but I wore it to school and everyone laughed at me. So that didn't feel good. The problem was easily solved. I simply never wore the shirt again, at least not to school. Now, I also happen to be pretty good at science and math, and I would get laughed at for that too. Well, that I can't just leave at home. That's inside me. It's in fact a critical part of who I am. And so if I didn't want to get laughed at or bullied, I would have to not share that. I would try to hide that. Now, as a matter of practice, it wasn't very easy to do because people could tell about me right away. I was pretty geeky. I still am pretty geeky. At least now I have some options of being other ways too, I think. So I would try to push that down. I would try to hide that. So my first couple of years in college, I think I took a physics class, but then I stopped taking the physics classes. Now that's kind of funny because I got a PhD in it. So that meant there were a couple of years when I did not practice what became my greatest passion for several years, for almost a decade. So that's a pretty crappy life to push down inside me, to try to hide from the world what became one of my greatest passions. It was then one of my greatest passions. I just didn't realize it. So what brought it out? In part, practicing it. What happened was I ended up doing an education program where I was going to become a high school teacher. And I thought, I can teach math, I can teach science. So I had to take, among the teaching and sociology classes and psychology classes, I also had to take what I was going to teach. So I went back to taking math and physics classes, now under the guise of something else. And I was taking them, I was like, man, I love these classes. And so I guess I'd matured enough in that time to decide it was worth it for me. But had I not done the things, these exercises are to get you to do things. And in doing them, passions will emerge. Anyone who's listening to this and thinking, I don't have any passions, everyone who has said that to me of my students, and there's hundreds of people and clients, it's always come out. And the trick is, of the several tricks, to try to get it at the beginning, to pick like, what's my greatest passion? If you're lucky and it's obvious, great, go with it. For the other 99% of us, most of the time you're not really aware of what it is. And that's why I keep calling the problems that you come up with at the beginning rudimentary, or if you come up with a solution to the problem, rudimentary, because if you work on something that's even generally related to what you want to do, the more you work on it in an effective way, not just randomly doing things. Piano scales aren't just hitting the keys. It's hitting the keys in a specific way that people have figured out over centuries. And so these exercises get you to do things that move you forward. And if it's something that you love, that love will emerge, that passion will emerge. If it's something that you don't, it will lead you to what does faster and more effectively than any other way, certainly than trying to think or answering some HR questionnaire of like what field is right for you.
So why is it effective in leading you to something that you are passionate about?
Because if there's two things that might be passions of yours, you're not sure which one it is, or there's a few, for a lot of people there's lots, then what happens when you start working on one, if it's not your greatest passion, you still develop the skills. And one of the emotional skills is to sense what excites you, what gets you going. And if you work on A when B is actually the one that's really the one for you, A will start to lose it'll raise its luster as you start working on it, because this could really work. And then after a while you realize that's not really what I wanted to do. And B will, as those social and emotional skills increase, B will start becoming more and more important to you, and it will not lose its luster. And you will at one point, it's kind of funny. A lot of people feel like, won't I waste my time working on the wrong thing? Or what if it gets me, what if I wake up with the wrong spouse and a mortgage and a kid, except with ideas? It doesn't, with relationships, it might happen that way, but with people, it doesn't happen that way. With projects, it doesn't happen that way. If A loses its luster and B doesn't, you will switch to B, and you will get not sick of A, but you'll want to get rid of it so fast, and you'll wonder, how did I like that? But you'll move away from it with gratitude. And you'll think to yourself, I wish I'd done A earlier, because A is what got me to B.
Hey Rockstar, last week on the podcast I announced that I'm looking for 10 founding members for the C Method Academy. An update, these spots have all been filled, and a big thanks to those first 10 people who got in super quick. Now, on the subject of initiative and sharing your ideas and iterating, I will be working with these 10 founding members to develop up the idea of the C Method Academy, which will be a monthly training and membership site where we dive into the concepts talked about on the podcast, we'll study them and apply them and receive feedback and support from the community of members and coaches. Now, I have created a waitlist for those of you who want to be a part of the C Method Academy and, most importantly, want to be first to be notified when we launch. I will be opening up membership for the next round of, second founding members, and that will be at a heavily discounted early bird rate. So if you want to be the first to be notified, go to thecmethod.com/join and sign up to be on the waitlist. That's thecmethod.com/join. Okay, let's get back to the show. So we've got our personal essay. So in this, we're writing about maybe a rudimentary problem that we would like to solve, but
That
it
would be
doesn't
the
have to
second
be
step.
related to it. Pardon?
First the essay, then writing down the problems.
Oh, and then writing down the problems.
Yeah, it's two
Okay.
separate steps.
And then what comes after that?
So then then there's a whole series of steps where you go to other people, and what people want to do from practice is they want to get advice. They want to get judgment from people. But what you actually do is you get advice from people. And so first I start with people close to you who are non-judgmental and supportive. And so you say to them, basically, here's this idea, a problem and a solution. And I wonder if you could give me some advice on how to improve it. And at this stage, you have 5 problems and some rudimentary solutions. And there's a lot of practice in how to make these conversations flow, how to lead these conversations, because people really like to talk about them, but you really want to get specific advice. And then at the end of this stage, you narrow down from 5 to 1 based on their votes and also just your own, the ideas evolving. And after talking to 5 people and getting advice from each, at this stage, usually you've picked one and you start to have an attachment to it because you've helped change it, and other people have helped you. People in your world have helped change it. The next step is now you go to 10 friends and family who are a little bit farther away than the first group, and you do the same thing, except with one solution, one problem solution. And say you talk to 10 people at this stage, and you get 3 pieces of advice from each. That's 30 pieces of advice, and you iterated along each time. And now it starts really taking shape. So I'm going to speak broadly, if it's okay, about next stages.
Sure.
You can increasingly talk to people in the field that you are going into. At the beginning, you're not getting great advice. Most of the time, the people in your world aren't going to give you the best advice. They're just the most helpful people, the most supportive people.
So do we start with them because that's the easiest place to start because they already know us, they love us, and we feel comfortable talking with them?
Yeah, it's because you develop the skills easier there. I guess
Yeah, sure.
I think of it, the tennis game begins with the serve, but serves are really hard. So you don't start practicing the serve right away. You work up to that. You start with ground strokes and simple things. And so if you want to learn the social skills of getting advice and listening to people so that they feel like, when you ask people for advice, a lot of times they feel like, oh, good thing you asked me. I happen to be an expert. And you want them to get that feeling. And
are people afraid of asking
Oh, yeah.
experts and industry people for advice?
Yes, they totally are. And then ideally, they're chomping at the bit to do so at the end. Because as you work up to more and more people who are in the field more, a couple things happen. One, because you've done it so many times before, people ask you questions that you've already answered. And so when they hear you answer, when a person in the field hears you answer knowledgeably about something in the field, they're like, oh, you're one of us. And sometimes you'll talk to someone in the field and they mentioned someone and you're like, oh, I talked to that person. And so you're in a network. And when you present yourself as a problem solver in a field and you know other people in that field, you're one of them. You're a peer. And that's why towards the end of it, when it's time, the last exercise is to talk to valuable people in the field. So valuable could mean lots of different, usually it's funding sources, but it could be people who are very well connected, or it could be people who know how to solve a particular problem of yours. A lot of times people do this. Some people do these exercises in just over a month, and they're talking to people in the field, and the people in the field see them as a peer, and they have no idea that the idea didn't even exist 6 weeks before. And people who do the exercise are shocked. They're like, shouldn't I tell them? I'm like, you can tell them if you want, but you don't have to. They see you as a peer. End of story. And they want you to succeed.
This is it's a really great point you're making here because like a lot of people I meet, they tell me that they get very nervous and intimidated when talking to experts in the field or, talking to very senior people, because they put them up on this pedestal. And what you're describing here is it sounds like when your students go to speak to these experts in the field, they're seen as equals, which I imagine would make the conversation much, much easier.
I got to tell you Joanne's story.
Yeah, sure.
NYU has a lot of international students. So she was, I think, from Hong Kong. English is not her native language. So she speaks conversationally, but not fluently. And she was doing a project that involved Broadway shows. And she wanted to talk to a producer, and she didn't know how to reach the guy. All she knew was that he was doing a play at a particular Broadway theater. So she's like, how do I reach the guy? So she calls up the ticket office, because obviously ticket offices will always answer the phone. And she goes, I'm looking for so-and-so. And the person's like, puts her on hold. And by the way, we're in class now. So she's telling me this, and the whole class is kind of listening, and they're kind of like, they're just kind of listening. And so she's on hold for a little bit, and then the phone picks up, and she hears the voice of the other and go, what? Yes, what? And she goes, yeah, I called up, I'm looking for so-and-so. And the person goes, yes, that's me. And it's the guy, right? She reached this famous producer. Yeah, this Broadway producer. And so everyone in the class now is like, sits up. They're like, what? How'd you, this is amazing. And so the Broadway, she's like, what do I say? What do I do? Now, here's what happened. If, anyone who's watched Karate Kid knows the wax on, wax off, she's done this so many times that even though she doesn't know what to do, she just autopilot says the things that she's been saying to the friends and family and to the people who weren't big people, not the valuable people in the field. And she goes, and there's a script that's in the book that's like, you don't have to follow it, but she did basically, I'm a student at NYU, I'm working on this entrepreneurial project, and I wonder if you're an expert in the field, and I wonder if you could give me a couple ideas or a couple of suggestions to improve it. And she goes, what? right? Kind of angry. And she goes, well, here's the thing. And he goes, well, you should do that. And he kind of spurts out the answer. That's the impression I got. And she's like all freaked out. And the whole class is listening. And so with you, I'm going to be a little more direct than I was with her, because with her, she was flustered and there were emotions at play. But I walked her through that she wasn't injured. No one saw this and laughed at her. She didn't lose any money. And in fact, she got useful advice. And so I went through this series of questions to walk her through, seeing that it wasn't that big of a deal, as much as the emotions were real. She felt flustered. And then at the end, I asked her, would you do it again if you could? And she was like, yes. And the whole rest of the class, as a teacher, you love stuff like this because it began a race to the top in the class, that they all wanted to have something like that happen. And what made it succeed, certainly her gumption to call the place up, because she didn't have to, but that she had done it so many times that she had the social skills to do it, and she didn't have to think about it, and it works. And so now I've lost touch with her. She's back in Hong Kong, last I heard, but I presume that these are skills that she can now do. And actually, that's other students. The other stories have talked about how there's one of my students that she eventually went to law school, and her classmates keep asking her, well, how is it that you get these choice internships and you get to work with all these great professors? And she's like, I ask. And she's like, they don't ask. I don't know what they're waiting for. But she also says she used to also wait. And so want to know some things that this applies to. If you're a student and you in a professional school, you want to work with the most effective professionals. And this is the sort of thing that she doesn't go up and say, can I work with you? She goes up and says to them, this is my interest. And I wonder if I could, I wonder if you could give me some advice on how to think about this sort of thing. So she caters the skills that she learned here into the particular use there. Raphael, he had access to them, to the managers. He just led the conversation to judge him. And, when you judge, you put them on a pedestal, all they can do is look down at you. And he'd be lucky if he got something, but he was really playing a game of battleship. Like A7, miss. B8, miss. It doesn't help you get to the next stage. The advice does.
So Raphael went and asked, he went and asked for their advice. So he went through that process.
Yeah, instead of trying to create a perfect idea that they would approve, he had a rudimentary idea and would ask them for advice. And that way they also helped make it a great idea. And by the time it was a great idea, so much of them was in it that how could they not say yes? Because, and
absolutely.
It was him on his own, he probably could not have made it so great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joshua, it's so awesome to speak with you, and I love the way that you're teaching this and breaking it down into really simple steps that people can follow. And I love how your steps of building up the skills of, sharing your ideas with people and not putting people up on a pedestal. The way I see that as being beneficial in that you will feel naturally more comfortable even having those conversations, as opposed to thinking, I have to present this perfect idea and be judged on it, which is a very scary thought. Josh, do you have any final words for the listeners?
Everybody has these passions inside them. I said it before, and a lot of people say one of two things, but it's really the same thing. I don't have any ideas, or I have so many ideas I don't know which to start with. And the reason I say it's the same is it's not knowing your priorities well enough to be confident to act on it. And thinking things through will only get you so far, but acting on them gets you much farther. And this book gives you a way to act on it in a way that's, I don't want to lie. There's going to be some anxiety. It's not like trivial, but it works. And you'll look back and say, that was there. That has always been there. I've known that for so long. Why didn't I act on it before? I wish I'd acted earlier. It's there.
Love it. Joshua, can you tell us where we can find your book, and also tell us about your podcast?
Yeah, so everything's at joshuaspodek.com. And so in the upper right corner is the links to the podcast and to the book and lots of other things too. And so the podcast, the Leadership in the Environment podcast is, I'd always acted environmentally. And well, in Australia, you might not know that we elected a president who I suspected was not going to move in the direction that I felt was right for the environment. And I felt like me acting on my own was not enough. I really wanted to I think there's missing leadership in this area. And so I bring leaders to the environment, and I have really world-renowned people on the podcast. I'm trying to get them to share what they care about, what the environment means to them, to act on that, in the hopes that people listening will also look inside themselves and think of what they care about, because it's going to be unique to everybody, and then to act on that. Because when they do, and I have the guests on a second time, when they're on the second time to share what the experience was like acting on that thing that was based on what they cared about, invariably they say, thank you for getting me to do this. And I hope that listeners will feel a couple things. One of the main ones is to stop feeling, if I act but no one else does, then what I do doesn't matter. Or these little things are so small, what's the point? But these big things are so big, it's too much to do. And feel like, I want to do this. I'm glad I enjoyed doing this. I want to do more. I want to share this with others. I want to share this joy, not deprivation, not sacrifice, but joy with others. And I want to help create that cultural change.
Are you feeling inspired yet to take on your own project? Big thanks to Joshua Spodek for being such a wonderful guest on the show this week. I always find it very inspiring whenever I speak with him. You can find out more about what he does and read his blog post, listen to his podcast at joshuaspodek.com, or simply visit the show notes at thecmethod.com/216. Like I mentioned in the break, remember to join the waitlist for the C Method Academy if you want to be the first to be notified when those next membership spots open up. Again, the C Method Academy will be the monthly membership site and training program for those of you who love the podcast and want to apply the concepts and develop your communication and speaking and confidence skills. To sign up for the waitlist, go to thecmethod.com/join. And that brings this week's episode to a close. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'm Christina Canters, and this has been Stand Out, Get Noticed.